A story, narrated by Isolde. My husband got my mother pregnant. And when I found out, they didn't beg. They didn't apologize. They burned me alive, me, and my 4-year-old son. They stood outside and watched the fire take us. The man I gave everything to, and the woman who gave birth to me. The two people who should have been my refuge, my blood, my home. They chose each other, and they chose to make sure I never spoke about it. What they didn't count on was me walking out of those ashes. And today, I walked into their boardroom. I took the seat at the head of their table, and I brought with me the most feared alpha in this world. A man so dangerous that every person in that room dropped to their knees the moment he walked through the door. My mother's hands are shaking. My husband hasn't blinked since I sat down. Good. They should be afraid. Because this is not revenge. Revenge is what small people do. What I'm about to do to them doesn't have a name yet. Chapter 1. The life I built. I was not born into pack life. I came into it the way most valuable things do. Quietly, deliberately, through a door that looked like chance but wasn't. I was 24 the first time I saw Vladimir Harkin. He was standing at the edge of a gallery opening, a glass of whiskey held loosely in his hand, looking at a painting he wasn't seeing. He had the look of a man still breathing after something had tried to stop him. Present in body, absent everywhere else. He had lost his fated mate 7 months before. Her name was Milena. The pack had mourned her for weeks. Candles, ceremonies, a grief so public it had become almost architectural. Vladimir had survived it the way certain men survive the unsurvivable. By going very still. By continuing to function. By refusing to let the wound show in any room where showing it would cost him something. I watched him from across that gallery for a long time before I crossed it. I knew, before I reached him, exactly what I was going to say. I knew before he turned to look at me, exactly what expression I was going to wear. What I did not know, what I could not have predicted and would not have admitted even if I had, was that something would shift in me the moment he looked up. Something small, something I filed away immediately and did not examine for a very long time. I told myself it was nothing. I was very good at telling myself things. We were mated within the year. The pack received me cautiously. I was not one of them. Not born to the blood, not raised in the traditions, not carrying the ease of a woman who has always known what she is. They sensed something in me they couldn't name. A smoothness. The way I always knew the right thing to say and said it without hesitation. Wolves trust instinct, and their instinct quietly did not fully trust me. But Vladimir wanted me. And what an alpha wants, the pack allows. The mating ceremony was held at the estate on a Sunday, evening in October. The grounds were lit with torches. The pack elders spoke the old words. Vladimir held my hands and looked at me, the way I had seen him look at nothing else. With his whole face, unguarded, every wall he had ever built taken down at once. I looked back at him and felt the sharp, clean satisfaction of a thing finally secured. And one other thing, something quieter, something I did not have a name for. I left it unnamed. It was safer that way. My mother stood at the edge of the ceremony in a champagne dress, a glass of wine in her hand, watching everything with those careful, patient eyes of hers. When it was over, she pulled me into an embrace that smelled of her perfume. Gardenias, always gardenias. And she whispered against my hair, "You did beautifully, my love. Like it was a performance, like she was the director and I had delivered my lines without fault. I pulled back and looked at her and smiled the smile she had taught me. "Thank you, Mama," I said, and I meant absolutely nothing by it. Dorian was born 18 months into the marriage. 7 pounds, dark hair. My eyes in Vladimir's face, or Vladimir's face, around my eyes. I was never sure which. He arrived in the world the way he would spend the next 4 years moving through it. Quietly, watchfully, like a small person who had already decided to pay attention. Vladimir held him first. I watched Vladimir hold him and something happened to my husband's face that I had never seen there before. Something that had no strategy in it, no performance, no careful management. He looked at our son and he simply came apart. Quietly. Completely. The way only the strongest people come apart. All at once. With no warning. He looked up at me with wet eyes and said nothing. I looked at my son. And I felt something I was entirely unprepared for. Not the consuming, world-ending love that women describe. Not the feeling of being remade. What I felt was sharper than that, more absolute. Recognition, clean and total, that this was the one thing in my life that was entirely, irreversibly mine. Not an acquisition, not a strategy. Mine. I did not know in that moment how much that distinction was going to cost me. The first 3 years were what the world would call perfect. The estate, the pack, the company growing under my hands the way things grow when someone who understands patience tends to them. Vladimir and I moved through our life together with a fluency that looked, from the outside, like a great love story. People envied us. I know because they said so. Often. What they didn't see, what no one saw, was the architecture underneath, the careful distribution of control, the quiet, consistent way I had made myself indispensable to every moving part of Vladimir's world. His schedule, his board, his public image, his private decisions. I had woven myself through all of it so thoroughly that removing me would have required dismantling everything. That was the point. I want to be clear. I am not telling you this as a confession. I am telling you this because you need to understand what I built before you can understand what they destroyed. Miriam came to stay in Dorian's second year. She had her reasons. She always had her reasons. Constructed carefully, delivered reasonably, impossible to refuse without appearing cruel. She was lonely. The apartment in the city felt empty. She wanted to be close to her grandson. I let her in. Not out of warmth. Not out of duty. I let her in because Miriam had always been useful, and I found exhausting. The social performances, the pack elder dinners, the careful management of people who needed to feel felt before they would cooperate. She was good at warmth. I was good at everything else. It seemed, at the time, like a reasonable arrangement. I have thought about that decision every day since the fire. I noticed the change in Vladimir slowly. A softening. A ease that appeared in him only in certain rooms at certain hours when a certain person was nearby. Not attraction, not that I could name it. Something more dangerous than attraction. Comfort. The comfort of a man who feels understood without having to explain himself. I had stopped making Vladimir feel understood years ago. I had started making him feel managed. There is a difference. I knew the difference. I had simply decided that management was more valuable than understanding. And in the ledger of our marriage, I had been correct. Until the moment I wasn't. I watched it. I noted it. I filed it in the place where I kept things I was not yet ready to act on. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself I had time. I told myself a great many things in those months. And while I was busy telling myself things, my mother was busy burning my life to the ground from the inside. But here is what I won't tell you yet. Here's what I will let you sit with. Miriam did not come to my marriage and find an opening. I left one. Whether I meant to, that is a question I am still not ready to answer. Chapter 2. What I found. What they did. I found out on a Tuesday, not through some dramatic revelation, not through a confrontation or a confession or a scene that announces itself with raised voices and broken things. I found out the way most terrible truths are found. Quietly, sideways. In the space between one ordinary moment and the next. I came home early from a board meeting. The house was warm in a way. That means people have been inside it all day, moving through its rooms, breathing its air, existing in it in ways they believed were private. The east corridor was quiet. Miriam's door was not fully closed. I stood outside it for a long time. Longer than I will admit, because some part of me, some very small, very buried part, already knew, had known for weeks, had been filing and watching and noting and telling itself to be patient, to be certain, to wait for the moment that could not be misread. This was that moment. I pushed the door open. And there it was. I won't describe what I saw. You don't need the image. What you need is what happened inside me in the 3 seconds between seeing and being seen. What moved through my body in that doorway before either of them had time to react. It was not grief. It was not rage. It was something far colder than both. A long, slow crystallization. As if everything still liquid in me turned to glass in an instant. Every suspicion I had filed, every door I had watched, every small thing I had noted and set aside and told myself meant nothing. All of it snapped into a single, coherent shape. I understood everything. Not just what was in front of me, all of it, the full length and depth of it, how long it had been building, what it had cost me without my knowing, what it was going to cost me now. I closed the door. I walked down the corridor. I went to Dorian's room and I sat on the floor beside his bed, and I watched him sleep for a long time, his small chest rising and falling, his face slack and perfect and entirely unaware of what his world had just become. I did not cry. I have not cried since I was 11 years old, and I saw no reason to begin now. I simply sat there, in the dark, and I thought. I thought for a very long time. Miriam came to me 3 days later. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, unhurried, composed, folding her hands the way she always folded them when she was about to deliver something she had rehearsed. She looked at me with those careful eyes, and she told me she was pregnant. She said it plainly, no preamble, no apology, no performance of regret. And then she said, I think it's time we had an honest conversation, Isolde. I remember the quality of the silence that followed that sentence, the audacity living inside it. 30 years of dishonesty, and she was sitting at my table, in my house, carrying my husband's child, choosing this moment to introduce honesty into our relationship. I asked her one question. How long? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The way she held my gaze, steady, almost compassionate, the way you look at someone you have already decided to stop protecting, told me everything the number would have. Long enough. That was the answer. long enough that the life I thought I was living had not been the life I was actually in. I stood up. I smoothed my jacket. I told her I needed to think. She nodded, slowly, like a woman who had already thought everything through and was simply waiting for me to catch up. I walked out of that kitchen and I did not look back at her. It was the last civil moment between us. Vladimir found me in the study that evening. He came in and closed the door and stood with his back against it, the way men stand when they are bracing for impact. Feet apart, jaw set, already armored. He looked at me across the room and I looked at him, and neither of us spoke for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't plan it." And I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because of all the things he could have said, all the words available to a man in that moment. He chose the ones that centered himself. That framed it as something that had simply happened to him, as if he were a passive participant in his own betrayal, as if the baby growing in my mother's body was a weather event, an act of nature, something no one could have prevented. "I know," I said, because I did know. I knew Vladimir. I knew exactly how it had happened. The loneliness I'd engineered into our marriage, the warmth Miriam had positioned herself to provide, the slow erosion of a man who needed to feel loved and had stopped feeling it at home. I knew the architecture of it better than he did. That was the part I couldn't tell him. "What do you want to do?" he asked. And I looked at my husband, this man I had chosen and secured and built a life around, this man standing against my door with his jaw set and his guilt written across every line of his face. And I understood that the question was not genuine. He already knew what he wanted to do. He was asking me because he needed me to make it easier. "I want you to be honest with me," I said. "For once. Completely honest. What do you want, Vladimir?" The silence that followed that question was the longest of our marriage. And then he told me. I will not repeat what he said, not because it broke me. It didn't. Not because I'm protecting him. I am not. I won't repeat it because what he said matters less than what happened afterward. What he said was just words. What happened afterward was something else entirely. I had 3 days. 3 days between that conversation and the fire. In those 3 days, I moved carefully. I made calls. I transferred documents. I secured certain things that needed securing. I was not panicking. I do not panic. But I was moving with the urgency of a woman who understands that the window for protecting herself is closing. I underestimated how fast. The fire started at 2 in the morning. Dorian was asleep in his bed. I was in the armchair beside him. I had not been sleeping well that week, which is the only reason I was awake when the smell reached me. Smoke first, then heat, then the sound of it, that low, consuming roar that fire makes when it has already decided it is going to win. I took Dorian from his bed. I carried him to the window. The east wing was already gone. The corridor between us and the main staircase was a wall of orange. I could see the grounds below. The dark lawn, the tree line, the figures standing at the edge of it. 2 figures, standing still, watching. I looked at them, and they looked up at me. And in the firelight, I could see their faces clearly enough to know this was not an accident, clearly enough to know they were not coming for us. I will not tell you what I did next. Not yet. Not how I got us out, or what it cost, or what I found when the smoke finally cleared and the world went quiet, and I understood that I was alive and I was alone, and everything I had built was ash. I will only tell you this. One of us did not make it out, and the person standing at the edge of those grounds, watching that fire with their hands at their sides and their face turned upward, that person believed they had finally solved their problem. They were wrong. But for a long time, a long, necessary time, I let them believe they were right. Chapter 3. Everything I lost. I want to tell you about the last thing I grabbed before the fire took the study. I had been in there for 40 minutes, since midnight, since the house went quiet, and I was certain they were both asleep. I had been moving through those files with the way a woman who understands that paper is power, and power is the only thing worth saving. Account documents, transfer records, the deed to 3 properties Vladimir didn't know I knew about. Evidence I had been quietly assembling for weeks. Evidence that doesn't burn easily in a courtroom, even when everything else does. I had almost everything. I was reaching for the last folder when the smell hit me. Smoke. Not the distant, ambient kind. The close kind that means it has already been burning long enough to find its way to you. I moved fast, down the corridor toward Dorian's room. His door, his bed, his small shape under the blankets. I grabbed him. He woke without crying, which is the thing about Dorian. I have never been able to fully explain. Even at 4 years old, he seemed to understand instinctively when silence was the right response to the world. I held him against my chest, and I turned back toward the corridor. It was already gone. The east staircase, our staircase, the only way down from that wing, was a wall of fire, orange and roaring and absolute. I stood at the threshold of it for 1 second, just one, and understood that we were not getting out that way. I ran back to the study window. The drop was 3 floors. The ground below was stone pathway, hard, unforgiving, the kind of landing that ends things. I looked at it, and I looked at Dorian, and I made the calculation that mothers make in the seconds when there is no good option and only the least terrible one. I wrapped him in the heaviest curtain I could pull down. I held him against my body. I stepped off the ledge. The impact was catastrophic and survivable, which is the narrowest margin I have ever lived inside. My left wrist took the ground first and snapped. 2 ribs followed. I felt them go. Sickening crack that is nothing like anything else. And then the pain arrived, white and total, and I lay there in the stone pathway, unable to move for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Dorian. I looked down at him, still wrapped, still pressed to my chest. His eyes were open, wide and dark, looking up at me, alive. I exhaled. And then I heard it. A sound beneath the roar of the fire, a sound that will live in me until I die. A sound from inside the house, from the east wing, from the direction of the nursery where I had grabbed Dorian and run, and in my panic, in the smoke, in the orange dark and the terror of that corridor, I had not checked the second room. I had not checked the second room. I cannot write what happened next in any way that will make you understand it. I cannot find the words that contain what moved through me in that moment. Standing in the stone pathway, with my broken wrist and my cracked ribs and the fire eating the house above me. I tried to go back in. I need you to know that. I need you to know that I tried. The ground floor entrance was already gone. The window I had just fallen from was swallowed. I stood at the edge of the heat with my arms up against it, and I screamed his name until my voice was nothing. until the smoke took my breath, and my legs went, and I was on the ground again, on my knees, on the stone, and the fire just kept burning. It kept burning. It didn't care what I needed. I don't remember how far I walked that night. I remember the tree line. I remember the cold of the grass under my bare feet. I remember sitting against a tree at some point, far enough from the estate that the fire was just a glow through the branches, and pressing my broken wrist against my stomach and breathing in the smallest increments my ribs would allow. I remember the silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence of a world that has just been emptied of something that cannot be replaced. The permanent silence of after. Dorian, my son, 4 years old, dark hair, my eyes in his father's face. The one thing in my life I had not acquired but made. The one thing that had no strategy underneath it. Gone. Because of them. Because of two people who looked at a woman and a child sleeping in their home and decided that their secret was worth more than our lives. I sat against that tree until the sky began to lighten, and I made myself look at it. The full weight of everything I had lost in one night, not as a list, as a reckoning. My son, my position, my Luna title. Gone the moment the pack believed me dead. Gone the moment Vladimir decided on his replacement narrative, whatever story he and Miriam had already constructed to explain the fire. The documents, everything I had been assembling, everything I had nearly had in my hands. Ash now. All of it. I had walked out of that house with nothing. No evidence, no protection, no leverage, stripped completely bare of every layer I had spent years building. And underneath all of it, underneath the loss and the grief and the cold fury, the thing I could not look at directly, but could not stop feeling. They thought I was dead. Vladimir and Miriam were standing somewhere right now, or sitting, or sleeping, or holding each other the way people hold each other after they have done something terrible and need to believe it was necessary. And they believed the fire had finished what they started. They believed I was gone. For a long time, sitting against that tree, I turned that fact over in my hands. And slowly, the way cold things warm, the way dark things find their shape in the light, I began to understand that it was not a wound. It was a weapon. I will not tell you the details of the weeks that followed, not because they are too painful. I have moved past the kind of pain that needs protecting, but because the details are not the point. The point is what they added up to. Cheap motels, borrowed clothes, a broken wrist set badly by my own hands because a hospital meant a name and a name meant a record, and a record meant they would know I was alive before I was ready for them to know. I ate when I could. I slept when my body forced it. I grieved in the only way I know how to grieve. Not in tears, not in collapse, but in a slow, consuming silence that I carried with me everywhere like a second body. An absence walking beside me. The shape of everything I had lost pressed against my side at every moment. Dorian. I said his name every morning, not out loud. Inside, where no one could hear it, where it belonged only to me. Some losses you don't survive whole. You survive them in pieces, carrying what you can, leaving the rest in the ash, walking forward on the understanding that forward is the only direction that means anything anymore. I walked forward. It was in the 5th week that I heard the name for the first time. A woman I had known years before. A Luna from the Western Territory. A woman who owed me a debt she had hoped I would never collect. I reached her through a contact, through a number I had memorized years ago as a precaution, through a careful, invisible thread that a certain kind of woman keeps in place for the day everything else breaks. I told her what had happened, what I needed. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "There is someone, but Isolde, you need to understand what you would be walking into." "Tell me," I said. And she told me about Zale Morrow. I listened to everything. The empire, the fear, the practice, the auctioning of powerful women as political currency, the cold machinery of it, the absolute absence of apology he operated. I listened to all of it without flinching, because flinching was a luxury and I had run out of those. When she finished, I asked her one thing. "Can you get me in front of him?" She exhaled the exhale of a woman who already knows she is going to say yes and is grieving it. "I'll make a call," she said. I drove to his compound on a gray morning in November, broken wrist freshly wrapped, the last of the money I had managed to access running thin. Nothing in my hands but the story I was going to tell, and the thing underneath the story that I was not going to tell. Not yet, not to him, not until I understood what kind of man I was dealing with. The gates were open when I arrived. Not for me, I understood that. They were open like powerful places are sometimes open, because they can afford to be. I was shown inside, left in a room, made to wait, 30 minutes, 40, the kind of waiting that is a test dressed as courtesy. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I did not move and I did not check my watch, because I understood the game, and I had no intention of losing the first move. The door opened. Zale Morrow walked in. I had built a version of him in my mind from everything I had been told. I had expected something older, something visibly hardened, something that wore its danger on the outside just as lesser men do. Loudly, aggressively, needing you to see it. He was none of that. He was younger than his reputation and older than his age simultaneously. He moved through the room without adjusting to it, as though the space existed for him rather than around him. He sat across from me. He looked at me once, briefly. Then he said, "Tell me what you want." No greeting, no performance of civility, just the question, clean and direct, from a man who had no interest in the scaffolding people use to make difficult things feel comfortable. I told him everything. The pregnancy, the fire, what I had lost, what I needed, what I was prepared to offer in return. I told it without tears, without performance, without anything that could be read as weakness, because I understood instinctively that weakness in this room would end the conversation before it began. I watched his face the entire time I spoke. Nothing moved in it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me, and his eyes shifted in a way I could not name. "No," he said. I looked at him. "I'll come back," I said. The corner of his mouth moved. Barely. The ghost of something that was not quite a smile. "I know," he said. And he stood and walked out of the room and left me sitting there in his silence, in the heavy, deliberate silence of a man who has already made a decision about you and is simply waiting for you to catch up to it. I sat in it for a moment. Then I stood, smoothed my jacket, walked out into the gray morning with my broken wrist and my empty hands, and the cold, absolute certainty of a woman who has lost everything and has therefore nothing left to be afraid of. He said no. He would not say it again. Chapter 4. The Devil's House. I came back 4 times before he agreed to see me again. The first time, I was turned away at the gate. No explanation, No message, simply a man in a dark jacket stepping in front of my car and looking at me with the blankness of someone following instructions they did not write. I turned around. I drove back. I did not allow myself to feel anything about it. The second time, I made it inside. Past the gate, past the entrance, all the way to the same room where I had sat before. I waited 40 minutes. No one came. Eventually, a different man, quieter than the first, more careful with his eyes, appeared in the doorway and told me Mr. Morrow was unavailable. I thanked him. I left. The third time. I didn't make it past the entrance hall before she appeared. I had heard about Nadia. She was described in careful language by people who chose their words. Zale's woman, his mistress, the one who had been beside him longer than anyone else in his world and had survived that proximity in a way that no one could fully explain. She came down the staircase slowly, unhurried. When a woman moves, when she wants you to have time to look at her. And I did look, because not looking would have been its own kind of signal. She was striking. Not beautiful in any soft or approachable way. Beautiful in a certain dangerous way. Sharp-featured, dark eyes, wearing a silk robe at 11 in the morning, with the ease of a woman in absolute possession of her territory. She stopped at the bottom of the staircase and looked at me. I looked back at her. The silence between us was not the silence of two women sizing each other up. It was something older than that, more animal. The silence of two creatures who have immediately and completely understood each other and are deciding in real time what to do about it. Then she smiled. It was the most unsettling smile I had ever seen on a human face. Not because it was cruel. Cruel smiles have a logic to them, a legibility. This smile had no logic. It arrived on her face without explanation, carrying the suggestion of damage. "He's not seeing anyone today," she said. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "I know," I said. "Tell him I was here." She tilted her head. A small movement that in another woman might have meant curiosity. In Nadia it meant something I couldn't fully read and wasn't sure I wanted to. "I'll think about it," she said. And she turned and walked back up the staircase without another word. I stood in that entrance hall for a moment after she disappeared. Then I left. The fourth time, he was waiting for me. Not in the room where we had met before. In a different space entirely. Larger, colder. A room that felt more like a statement than a room. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the compound grounds. A desk that no one sat behind, because no one needed to perform authority at that level. Two chairs facing each other, with nothing between them. He was already seated when I was shown in. I sat across from him. He looked at me, same way he had looked at me the first time. That brief, complete assessment. And then he said nothing. Just waited. With the patience of a man who had made waiting into a form of dominance so refined it was almost elegant. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "You keep turning me away." "Yes," he said, "but you keep letting me back through the gate." Something shifted in his expression. Not much, barely enough to see. "What does that tell you?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "That I haven't decided yet," he said. "Decide," I said. "I want to tell you about the world I was stepping into, because you need to understand it, the full shape of it, the machinery underneath the clean surfaces, and the expensive silence. Before you can understand what it meant that I was willing to step into it at all. Zale Morrow's empire operated in the space between two worlds. On the surface, legitimate. A corporation with subsidiaries across 6 industries, a property portfolio that spanned 4 countries, a board of directors whose names appeared in financial publications and whose reputations were unimpeachable. Clean, architectural, the kind of wealth that generates more wealth simply by existing. Underneath, the pack world, the real economy, the one that runs on bloodline and territory, and the kind of agreements that are never written down because the consequences of breaking them are more binding than any contract. And underneath that, his practice, the auctioning of women. I want to be precise about what this was, because imprecision would let you imagine something simpler than the truth. He did not traffic women. He did not deal in the powerless or the unwilling, not because of conscience, but because powerless women had no political value, and Zale Morrow had no interest in things without political value. What he dealt in was influence. A Luna from a wealthy pack, offered in marriage to a rival alpha as the centerpiece of a territorial agreement. A daughter of an elder, positioned as a bride in a merger between 2 pack dynasties that had been in conflict for decades. Women as living currency, as breathing signatures on agreements that their fathers and husbands and alphas had decided to make. He packaged it. He brokered it. He took his percentage from both sides and moved on to the next arrangement like a man who had decided long ago that morality was a luxury for people who couldn't afford the alternative. The women in his compound, and there were always women in his compound, moved through it with a quality of stillness, not broken, not visibly afraid. Something more than either of those. Calibrated, as if they had each made a private calculation about what was possible within these walls and had adjusted their entire interior world accordingly. I watched them when I came and went. I noted the stillness. I understood it. And I made sure, every time I walked through those doors, that I moved. Nothing like them. He agreed to see me on a Thursday evening in December. Not in the meeting room this time. In a private dining room, a space that was clearly designed for a unique conversation that happens over food and wine and the deliberate performance of normalcy, while something else entirely moves underneath it. Nadia was not there. I noted her absence. Quietly, completely, filing it in the place where useful information lives. We ate. We talked. Carefully at first, like 2 people talking when they are both fluent in the language of not revealing too much too soon. He asked me questions that sounded like small talk, and weren't. I answered them in ways that sounded like answers, and weren't entirely. I was watching him. He was watching me. It was the most honest interaction I had had with another person in years. Not because we were being truthful, but because we were both fully present in it, both engaged, both, in some way I hadn't expected, genuinely interested. At some point, the food was cleared, and the wine was poured, and the room got quieter how rooms get quiet, when has been set aside, and something realer has taken its place. He looked at me across the table. "You're not what you presented yourself as," he said. Not an accusation, a statement delivered with the flatness of a man reporting an observation. I held his gaze. "Neither are you," I said. The corner of his mouth moved. "What do you actually want from me, Isolde?" And I told him. Again. But differently this time. Not the clean business proposition of our first meeting. Something raw. Something that had the shape of truth, even where it wasn't entirely true. I told him about Vladimir, about Miriam, about the fire and what I had lost in it, and what I needed to do about it, and why I had come to him. I told him what I was offering in return. He listened without interrupting, without the careful blankness of our first meeting. He listened, same way he had been listening all evening, missing nothing. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, "There is something you're not telling me." I looked at him. "There are many things I'm not telling you," I said. "Just as there are many things you're not telling me. That is not a reason to decline." Something moved through his eyes then, something quick and layered that I cataloged and could not yet fully read. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "You'll keep turning me away," I said. "No," he said. "Tomorrow I won't." I drove back to the motel that night through roads that had gone dark and empty. I should have been thinking about the deal, about strategy, about the careful architecture of what came next. Instead, I was thinking about how he had looked at me across that table. Not the usual way men look at me. With want, with assessment, with the hunger of someone who has decided they would like to acquire something. He had looked at me the way you look at something you cannot fully classify, something that sits outside the existing categories and therefore requires new ones. No one had ever looked at me that way. I did not know what to do with it. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was useful. Being interesting to him was useful. Being unclassifiable was useful. And whatever I felt about that look was simply the recognition of a strategic advantage. I told myself that. I was very good at telling myself things. But somewhere in the dark of that drive, in the quiet between one thought and the next, I felt it again. That thing I had felt leaving his compound the first time. That thing with no name. That thing I should have been more afraid of. It was stronger now. I drove faster, as if I could outrun it. I came back the next day. He was waiting. And this time, he did not turn me away. Chapter 5. Transaction. He was sitting at his desk when I walked in, not waiting how people wait when they are eager, leaning forward, watching the door, betraying themselves with their own anticipation. He was working. Papers in front of him, pen in hand. He looked up when I entered, like when a man looks up when an appointment has arrived. Acknowledged, noted, returned to in a moment, like I was a meeting. I sat across from him without being invited to. He set his pen down. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he opened the drawer to his right, and he removed a single sheet of paper, and he placed it on the desk between us, and he slid it across to me. I looked down at it. It was a contract. Handwritten, 4 clauses and clean. I read it slowly. The first clause: Isolde Harkin would reside in the Morrow compound for the duration of the arrangement. She would be provided security, accommodation, and resources at Zale. Morrow's discretion. The second clause: the arrangement would be consummated at Zale Morrow's discretion as frequently as required, until a pregnancy was confirmed by a pack physician of his choosing. The third clause: upon confirmed pregnancy, Zale Morrow would deploy his full resources toward the dismantling of Vladimir Harkin's pack, company, and standing. Miriam Voss would be dealt with according to Isolde's instructions. The fourth clause: the child, upon birth, would carry the Morrow name. Isolde's role in the child's life would be negotiated separately, at a later date, at Zale Morrow's discretion. I read that fourth clause twice. Then I picked up his pen, and I signed my name at the bottom of the page. He took the paper back. He looked at my signature. He folded it once and returned it to the drawer. "A room will be prepared," he said. "You'll move in tonight." He picked up his pen and returned to his papers. I had been dismissed. The room they gave me was at the far end of the east corridor. Large. Cold. I unpacked the little I had. I sat on the edge of the bed. Outside the window, the compound grounds stretched out in the dark. Manicured, silent, lit at intervals by lights that were more security than aesthetic. I could see the gate from where I sat, the tree line beyond it. I thought about Dorian. I thought about him every night. That was the one thing I had not been able to organize or manage or file away at the hour of night, when his absence arrived in full, when there was nothing left to do and nothing left to plan, and nothing standing between me and the silence where he used to be. I sat with it. I let it move through me like a wave moving through you when there is no shore close enough to run to. Then I lay down, and I waited for whatever came next. He came at midnight. One knock. I had been awake. I do not think I had expected to sleep. I said nothing, and the door opened and he stepped inside and closed it behind him. He did not speak. He crossed the room and I looked at him in the dark and I understood that this was the second clause of our contract being honored and nothing more. There was no performance of desire in him, no warmth, no attempt to make the transaction feel like something it wasn't. I respected that in a cold way. I had asked for a deal. He was treating it like one. What I had not accounted for, what I could not have accounted for, was the quality of his attention, even in the emptiness of it, even stripped of everything soft and everything performed. He was present in a way that I was entirely unprepared for, fully, completely present, as though even this, even a transaction, even a clause in a contract, deserved his complete attention. No one had ever given me their complete attention. Not like that. Not without wanting something from it. Afterward, he lay still beside me for a moment. The room was very quiet. I stared at the ceiling, and I kept my breathing even, and I waited for him to leave just like I expected him to leave. Without ceremony, without acknowledgement, like leaving a meeting when the meeting is over. He didn't move for a long time. Then he said, quietly, into the dark, "Are you all right?" Not tender, not soft, just the question. Clean and direct, the same way everything he said was clean and direct. I turned my head and looked at him. "Yes," I said. He nodded once. He got up. He left. I lay in the dark after the door closed and I stared at the ceiling, and I felt something moving through me that I did not want to name and therefore didn't. I told myself it was nothing. I was very good at telling myself things. The next morning he looked at me across the breakfast table like I was a guest he had forgotten was staying. Not cold exactly. Not unkind. Simply neutral. The neutrality of a man who has organized his interior world into compartments and keeps them from bleeding into each other with a discipline that is almost architectural. Last night was in one compartment. This morning was in another. I understood it. I even admired it. It bothered me in a way I refused to examine. I ate my breakfast. I asked one of his staff for access to a secure line. I began making calls. He did not ask what calls. He did not ask what I was doing or what I needed or how the arrangement was sitting with me in the daylight. He went to his office. The day passed. He came to my room again that night, and the night after, and the night after that. And every morning the compartment closed and we were two people in an arrangement and nothing more. I told myself this was preferable. I told myself that sentiment was a liability and that this clean, organized, emotionless, was exactly the kind of arrangement I had always operated best within. I told myself all of this very convincingly. Nadia watched all of it with those bright, unreadable eyes. In the first week, she was simply present, moving through the compound the same way she had always moved through it, with ownership, with the ease of someone who has been the most important person in a space for so long, they have stopped noticing it. She looked at me when our paths crossed. She said nothing. I watched her back. In the second week, she began working on the pack. I noticed it first the way the staff looked at me. Small things. A pause before responding. An eye contact held a beat too long. A quality of silence that follows a conversation that stopped just before you entered the room. I had grown up reading rooms. I knew what it looked like when a narrative about you was being built in spaces you weren't in. Nadia was building one. I didn't know yet what she was saying. I knew it wasn't good. I knew it was working. In the third week, she did something that crossed the line from dangerous into catastrophic. The pack physician came to examine me. A routine check, part of the arrangement, confirming health and cycle and the progress of what we were attempting. He was a quiet man, careful, professional. He came back to me 2 days after that first examination with a look on his face that I had not seen there before. He told me, carefully, in the language of a man choosing every word, that the tonic he had prescribed for me, the one left on my nightstand each morning by staff, the one I had been taking for 2 weeks without question, it had been altered. Not enough to harm me permanently, enough to prevent pregnancy indefinitely. I sat very still while he told me this. Then I asked him one question. Who had access to it? He looked at me. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I found Zale in his office. I closed the door. I stood in front of his desk and I told him what the physician had told me. I told him cleanly, without emotion, the way I told him most things. I watched his face while I spoke. Something happened in it that I had not seen there before. Something moved through his expression. Underneath the control, underneath the compartments, something that was not the cold neutrality of a businessman and was not the detachment of a man honoring a contract. Something personal. He stood up. He said, "Where is she?" Not loud, not aggressive. Quietness that is worse than loudness. I told him I didn't know. He walked past me and out of the office, and I stood there for a moment, and then I followed. He found Nadia in the east sitting room. She was curled in the chair by the window. Composed, beautiful, holding a book she wasn't reading. She looked up when he walked in. She looked at his face and something shifted in hers. The recognition of a threshold being crossed. "Zale, don't," he said. He stood in front of her and he looked down at her, and the room was very, very quiet. "Tell me it isn't true," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, those dark eyes, that face that held something behind it, that shifted and moved and never resolved. Then she lifted her chin. "I did what I had to do," she said. The silence after that sentence was the most dangerous silence I had ever stood inside. Zale looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You have until tomorrow morning to be gone from this compound." She stared at him. "Zale." Her voice cracked on his name, just slightly. Just enough. "Everything I have done, everything has been for you. Every year I have been here, everything I have survived in this house, every woman you have brought through it, every arrangement, every transaction. I stayed. I was always here. And you are going to stand there and choose her, Someone you have known for weeks. Over. Tomorrow morning, he said. He turned and walked out. Nadia sat in the chair and looked at the doorway he had left through. And then she looked at me. I was still standing in the entrance of the room. She looked at me with those bright, still eyes, and she smiled. That smile, the one with no logic in it, the one that arrived like weather. Enjoy it, she said softly. While it lasts. I held her gaze. Goodbye, Nadia, I said. I walked out. 6 weeks after I moved into the compound, the physician confirmed the pregnancy. He told me in the morning. I sat with it for the rest of the day. Not with joy, not with grief, with something I could not categorize. Something that sat in the chest and did not move and did not resolve. That evening I went to Zale's office. I stood in the doorway. It's confirmed, I said. He looked up from his desk. He looked at me for a long moment. That layered expression, the one I had been learning to read in increments, the one that held more than he intended it to. Then he stood up. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the exact quality of what was in his face. And what was in his face, for the first time, was something with no transaction in it at all. He reached up and he touched my face. Once. Briefly. The back of his fingers against my cheek. Then he dropped his hand. Now, he said quietly, we begin. What happened next was not slow. Zale Morrow did not dismantle things incrementally when he had decided to move. He moved just like a controlled demolition moves. Everything calculated in advance, every charge placed, and then all of it detonated at once so that the structure falls in on itself without damaging anything around it. Within 72 hours, 3 of Vladimir's senior board members resigned simultaneously. Their letters of resignation were identical in tone and vague in explanation, because the conversations that had preceded them had not been the ones get documented. Within the week, the financial architecture of Harkin Industries began to surface problems that had apparently been present for years, but had never quite materialized into visibility. Regulatory questions, compliance gaps, the kind of issues that a well-resourced legal team can ordinarily manage indefinitely, until someone with sufficient motivation decides to stop letting them. Someone had decided. I heard Vladimir called an emergency board meeting. He sat at the head of his table and he looked at the faces around it, and he understood, for the first time, that the ground beneath him was not what it had been. He did not yet know why. He did not yet know who. He was about to find out. I had one move left to make before the morning I walked into that boardroom. One piece that needed to be in place. I had found him 3 weeks earlier, Miriam's brother Edmund, sitting in a diner 3 hours away, carrying 20 years of being cut out of everything that should have been his. I had sat across from him and told him who I was. He had stared at me for a long time. They said you were dead, he said. I know, I said. Help me make them wish they were. He signed his shares over to me that afternoon, combined with everything Zale had already acquired, combined with 3 other positions, accumulated through names that meant nothing to anyone watching. We crossed the threshold. Majority, controlling interest in Harkin Industries. Mine. I held the document in my hands that evening, and I felt the cold, clean satisfaction of something snapping into its final position after a very long time out of place. Zale found me in the library. He looked at the document. He looked at me. Ready? He said. I thought about Dorian, about the fire, about the ash and the cold in the motel rooms, and every morning I had woken up and made myself continue when continuing was the hardest available option. I looked at my husband's company in my hands. "Tomorrow," I said. That night, neither of us slept. We lay in the dark and the silence of a compound that was very quiet around us, and we did not touch, and we did not speak. And somewhere in the space between us, in the charged, complicated air of two people who have made a transaction, and somewhere along the way, made something else entirely. Something sat that neither of us had named and both of us could feel. At some point, he said, "Into the ceiling, into the dark. After tomorrow, what do you want?" I turned my head and looked at him. "Everything," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I mean for yourself," he said. "Not what you're taking from them. What do you want for yourself?" I looked at him for a long time. I had not been asked that question. Not once, not by anyone, not in a way that meant it. I did not have an answer. And the fact that I did not have an answer, the fact that I had spent so long planning what to take that I had never once thought about what I actually wanted, sat in me like something sharp and new and entirely unexpected. "I don't know," I said. He nodded slowly. In the morning, we drove to Harkin Industries. 42nd floor, glass walls, leather chairs, 12 faces turning toward the door. And I walked in. Chapter 6. The Harvest. I arrived before them. I wanted that. I wanted to already be in the room, already seated, already still, already in possession of the space. When they walked in, I wanted the advantage of watching their faces in the first unguarded second. Before they had time to arrange themselves. Before the performance could be assembled. I had been in that boardroom 100 times. I knew the way the morning light came through the east windows. I knew the quality of the silence on the 42nd floor. That expensive, pressurized silence of a room where significant things happen, and everyone in it knows it. I sat at the head of the table. I folded my hands. I waited. They came in at 9:03. Vladimir first, still commanding, still carrying himself with the authority of a man who has never once walked into a room without believing it belonged to him. He was speaking to someone over his shoulder. Something about the morning's agenda. Something ordinary and professional and entirely unprepared for what was about to happen to it. He turned. He saw me. The sentence he was speaking stopped in the middle of a word. Just stopped. Like something had cut the power to it. Like his entire system had encountered something it had no protocol for and had simply shut down. He stood there in the doorway and he looked at me, and the color left his face so completely and so rapidly that the man beside him actually reached out and touched his arm. Miriam came in behind him. She saw me half a second after he did. Her handbag hit the floor. She did not pick it up. The other board members filtered in around them, reading the room, feeling the wrongness of it, looking between the man frozen in the doorway and the woman sitting at the head of their table, and understanding that something was happening that they did not have the context to interpret. I looked at Vladimir. I looked at Miriam. I smiled. "Close the door," I said. "We have a great deal to cover this morning." No one moved for a long moment. Then the doors opened again. I did not look. I did not need to. I felt it. The shift in the room's atmosphere, the way the air pressure changed, the way something ancient and instinctive moved through every wolf in that space like a current through water. One by one, board members, security, the assistant by the window, they went to their knees, not all at once, in a wave, like dominoes falling in slow motion, each one dropping as Zale Morrow passed them, as his presence moved through the room and found every person in it, and reminded them, wordlessly and completely, of exactly where they sat in the order of things. He walked to the chair beside mine. He sat down. He placed one hand flat on the table. He did not look at the people kneeling. He looked at me. Only me. And I held his gaze for one moment, one private, weightless moment in the middle of everything, before I turned back to the room. Sit down, I said. All of you. They sat. Even Vladimir, even Miriam. They sat because the alternative was to keep standing in a room that contained Zale Morrow, and their legs had already made the decision for them. I let the silence run for a moment. I've always understood the power of silence, the way it builds pressure, the way it forces the people inside it to fill it with their own fear, their own guilt, their own imagination, which is always more damning than anything you could say yourself. Vladimir's jaw was tight. His hands on the table in front of him were very still. Miriam had retrieved her composure. Mostly. She sat straight. She had found her face again. That careful, gracious face. That performance of a woman who is always reasonable, always measured, always the one extending understanding to difficult situations. I looked at her, and I felt something cold and clean move through me. Not rage, not grief, satisfaction. The satisfaction of a very long wait arriving at its end. Let me tell you, I said, about my mother. Miriam's eyes moved to mine. Miriam Voss presented herself to this pack as a grieving widow, a devoted mother, a gentle woman who wanted only to be close to her daughter and her grandson. I paused. She is none of those things. I opened the portfolio in front of me. I removed the first document and I slid it to the center of the table, where the board members closest to it could see it. What she is, I said, is a predator. A woman who has spent 30 years identifying vulnerable men, wealthy men, powerful men, men made hollow by loss or grief or loneliness, and positioning herself and the people around her to extract everything those men had. A murmur moved through the board. Miriam's chin lifted. Isolde, she said. Her voice was careful, controlled. I understand you are in pain. What happened to you was your design, I said. The room went very quiet. Sit down, Mama, I said. I haven't gotten to the part about Milena yet. I watched Vladimir's face when I said her name. Milena. Something moved through him, a wound reopening, the pain of a loss so old it had become structural, built into the architecture of who he was, his fated mate, the woman he had loved before grief became his permanent address. Milena Oren did not die in a rogue attack, I said. The silence in that room became a different kind of silence. She was targeted, deliberately, by a woman who needed her gone, who needed Vladimir Harkin grieving and hollow and reachable so that the next phase of a very long plan could begin. I looked at my mother. Tell them, Mama. Tell them about the arrangement. Tell them what you told me when I was 19 years old about how men like Vladimir are found and how they are opened up and how you walk through the door that their grief makes. Miriam stood up. This is fabrication, she said. Her voice was still controlled, but something underneath it was beginning to fracture. This is a woman who has clearly suffered a trauma and is now She is confused. She has always been. There have always been questions about Isolde's mental stability. Anyone in this pack will tell you. Sit down. My voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Something in the quality of it, the absolute stillness of it, the complete absence of any emotion that could be destabilized, moved through the room and pressed Miriam back into her chair before she had consciously decided to sit. I reached into my portfolio. I removed a second document, then a third. I placed them on the table one at a time. Financial records, communications, a trail that it had taken me months to assemble and would take the board approximately 10 minutes to understand. My mother arranged Milena Oren's death, I said. She engineered my introduction to Vladimir Harkin. She moved herself into this pack, into this house, into this man's grief. Not because she loved him, because she wanted what he had. The pack, the company, the seat at this table that my marriage gave her access to and that I refused to share with her. I paused. When I found out about the pregnancy, when I made clear that I intended to expose what she had done, she convinced my husband that I was a threat, that I needed to be removed, and together, they set fire to the east wing of our home. I let that sit, with my 4-year-old son inside it. The room was absolutely still. Vladimir's face had gone somewhere I had never seen it go before, somewhere past guilt, past shock, into a place that had no name. The place a person goes when the entire architecture of their life is revealed in one morning to have been built on something that was never what they believed it was. Miriam looked at me, and something in her face shifted, the gracious mask slipping, something rawer and more frightened showing through the fractures. Isolde, she said. Quieter now. You don't want to do this. I have already done it, I said. I am your mother. You are a woman, I said, who has been mentally unwell for a very long time, who has constructed elaborate narratives to justify a lifetime of harm, who is not capable of distinguishing between her own delusions and reality. Miriam stared at me. The psychiatric facility that has been reviewing your case, I continued, has reached the same conclusion. Their assessment has been filed with the relevant authorities. Their team is waiting downstairs. The color drained from my mother's face. You cannot. I already have, I said. I picked up my phone. I made one call, 3 words. You can come up. They came through the boardroom doors 2 minutes later. 3 people, calm, professional, carrying with them the quiet authority of people who do this often and have learned to do it without drama. Miriam looked at them. She looked at me. She looked at Zale, sitting still and silent beside me, watching everything with those eyes that missed nothing and offered nothing. And then something happened that I had not expected. She laughed. Not the laugh of a woman who has lost her mind, the laugh of a woman who has just understood something completely. You are exactly me, she said. Look at you. Look at what you have built. Look at how you are sitting in that chair. She shook her head slowly. I made you. Everything you are, every single thing you used to do this, I put inside you. I looked at my mother. I know, I said quietly. Then you know this isn't over, she said. For you, it is, I said. She held my gaze for one last moment, and then the team reached her and the moment ended and she was guided out of the boardroom and the doors closed behind her and the room breathed again. A long collective exhale. The sound of people processing something they would be processing for a very long time. I did not watch her go. I turned to Vladimir. He was looking at me the way a man looks at something he has caused and cannot uncause. The grief of it was visible and total, not performed, not managed, just present in his face, the way damage is present in a structure that has been stressed beyond its tolerance. Vladimir, hearken, I said. He looked at me. You have been committing financial fraud against Harkin Industries for 11 years. His eyes changed. The documentation, compiled by your own former board members, verified by 3 independent forensic accountants, has been submitted to the relevant regulatory bodies. As of this morning, your assets have been frozen pending investigation. Isolde, you set fire to your home, I said, with your wife and child inside it. There are witnesses. There is evidence. There is a case that has already been filed. I looked at Zale. One look. Just one. He moved his hand slightly. A small gesture, barely visible. His men came through the doors, 4 of them, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who serve a man like Zale. Morrow and understand that efficiency is the only acceptable standard. Vladimir stood up. His chair scraped back. He looked at the men moving toward him, and then he looked at me. One last time, across the length of that table, with everything he had never said and would never now get to say written across his face. I thought you were dead, he said. I know, I said. Isolde, I'm sorry. I am. What I did, what we did, I know there is nothing. There isn't, I agreed. The men reached him. He didn't fight. I had not expected him to. Vladimir had never been a man who fought when the outcome was already decided. He went with them the way he had done everything in the last years of our marriage, without resistance, without agency, carried along by forces he had long since stopped trying to redirect. The doors closed behind him. The boardroom was very quiet. The remaining board members sat in a stillness that was part shock, part calculation, part alertness of powerful people rapidly reassessing which way the wind had turned and how best to position themselves within it. I looked around the table slowly, taking my time, letting them feel my eyes on each of them. Harkin Industries, I said, is under new ownership as of this morning. The transition has been filed and confirmed. Those of you who choose to remain on this board will find that very little changes in the day-to-day operations of this company. I paused. Those of you who choose not to remain, the door is behind you, and I wish you well. No one moved. No one left. Afterward, when the room had emptied, when the board members had filed out in the hushed and careful way of people who understood they had witnessed something significant, I sat alone at the head of that table. Zale remained. He sat beside me in the silence, and he looked at me, and I looked at the empty room, at the chairs and the glass and the skyline beyond the windows and the morning light coming through exactly the way it always had. I had sat in this room 100 times. I had never sat at this end of it. It felt exactly as I had imagined it would. It felt like nothing at all. Zale said, quietly, into the silence, "Is it enough?" I thought about that question for a long time. Then I turned and I looked at him, at this man who had walked into a burning situation and stayed, who had made a transaction, and somewhere inside, it made something else entirely, who was sitting beside me now in the wreckage of everything I had set out to destroy, and looking at me with those eyes that saw everything, and offered me the dignity of not looking away. Yes, I said. He nodded slowly. We sat in the quiet together for a moment longer. Then I looked at the camera. At you, watching. At the audience who had been with me from the beginning, who had grieved with me and raged with me and wanted this for me and cheered when it came. And I said, I have carried out my revenge, and you loved it. But there is a truth you don't know. And I will be glad to tell you. Chapter 7. The other side of the coin. You look satisfied. I can feel it. That warmth that comes from watching justice delivered, from seeing the wicked punished and the wronged restored, and the scales of the world balanced back into something that resembles fairness. You have been with me from the beginning. You grieved when I grieved. You raged when I raged. When Vladimir's men came for him this morning, you felt it land the way a long-awaited thing lands, with relief, with righteousness, with the clean and uncomplicated pleasure of an ending that makes sense. You were on my side. You are still on my side. I know. I built it that way. Let me tell you the truth now. Not the truth I have been telling you. The shaped truth, the curated truth, the truth with its ugliest corners, turned carefully away from the light. The real truth. All of it, from the beginning. You deserve it. And I, for reasons I'm still examining, find that I want to give it to you. Perhaps because there is no one left to protect myself from. Perhaps because the only thing more satisfying than a perfect revenge is the confession that reveals how perfect it actually was. Or perhaps because I am exactly what my mother always said I was, and I have stopped pretending otherwise. Milena Oren did not die because of my mother. She died because of me. I want you to sit with that sentence before I continue. I want you to feel the way it lands, the way it recontextualizes everything I told you in that boardroom this morning, the grief on Vladimir's face when I said her name, the horror that moved through the room when I implied my mother had arranged her death. I implied it. I did not lie. I never lie. Lying is inefficient and unnecessary when the truth, correctly arranged, does the job more effectively. My mother arranged the logistics of Milena's death. That is true. What I did not tell you, what I did not tell the board, what I did not tell Vladimir, is that it was my idea. I was 22 years old when Miriam first told me about Vladimir Harkin. She had found him the way she found all of them. Through the network of information she had spent decades cultivating. Through the quiet intelligence of a woman who had made other people's vulnerabilities her life's work. She told me about him over dinner one evening. His pack, his wealth, his territory, his fated mate, his fated mate. I remember the way the words sat in the conversation, the obstacle it represented. Miriam saw it as a complication, something to work around, something to wait out. Perhaps Milena would die young. Perhaps the bond would fracture. Perhaps there would be a window eventually. I looked at it differently. I looked at it as a problem with a solution. We don't wait, I told my mother. We remove her. Miriam looked at me across the dinner table. I remember her face in that moment, the expression that moved through it. Not shock exactly. Something more complicated than shock. Something that was almost recognition. If she is gone, I said, he grieves. If he grieves long enough without support, if he is alone in it, if the pack mourns with him but no one can reach him where the grief actually lives, he becomes reachable. And we are very good at reaching grieving men. I looked at my mother. You want the pack. You want the money. You want the seat at the table that a man like that can give you. This is how we get it. Miriam was quiet for a long time. Then she said, slowly, carefully, in the voice she used when she was frightened of something and did not want to show it. Isolde, what are you? I picked up my fork. I am your daughter, I said. Now eat. We have a great deal to plan. She called me a psychopath for the first time that night. Not as a diagnosis, as a recognition. The way you name something when you have been looking at it for a long time without the right word, and the right word finally arrives. She said it quietly, almost to herself, while she cleared the dishes. You are a psychopath. I heard her. I said nothing, but I filed it away. In the place where I kept the things that mattered, the things that would be relevant later. And I began, from that evening, to think about what my mother, knowing that truth about me, would eventually cost me. The answer, I decided, was everything. A woman like Miriam, who had built her entire methodology on finding and exploiting vulnerabilities, could not be allowed to hold that information indefinitely. She would use it, not immediately, not clumsily, but eventually, when it served her, when the balance of power between us shifted in a direction she needed to correct, she would reach for it. I could not allow that. So I began, quietly, patiently, with the long view that has always been my greatest strength, to build the architecture of her destruction. The question was how. The answer, when it came to me, was so elegant that I sat with it for a long time, simply appreciating it before I began to execute it. My mother wanted Vladimir. She had always wanted Vladimir, not the way women want men in stories, not with longing or romance or the messy inconvenience of genuine feeling. She wanted him the way she wanted everything, as an acquisition, as a seat at a table she had been standing outside of her entire life. I had that seat, and I was going to give it to her, not as a gift, as a trap. I withdrew from my marriage deliberately. I want you to understand how calculated this was. Every distance I created between Vladimir and myself, every evening I was unavailable, every warmth I withheld, every moment of connection I allowed to go unmade, was intentional. I was not neglecting my marriage. I was excavating it, removing everything that held it together until what remained was a structure with no interior, standing, functional in appearance, hollow at its center. And into that hollowness, I introduced warmth, my mother's warmth. I invited Miriam to stay. I gave her access to Vladimir's grief, to his loneliness, to the emptiness I had been carefully manufacturing. I watched her move toward him the way I knew she would, the way she always moved toward vulnerable men, with patience and gentleness, of a woman who wants nothing and therefore has everything to offer. I watched, and I waited. And when the pregnancy happened, when Miriam came to me at that kitchen table, with her folded hands and her careful eyes, and told me she was carrying my husband's child, I felt the clean, quiet satisfaction of a plan arriving at exactly the destination I had designed for it. She thought she was confessing. She was walking into the final room of a house I had built around her. The fire. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking. But they burned her. They tried to kill her. Surely that was not something she engineered. Surely that was the one thing that was real. The one genuine act of violence in a story full of constructed ones. Let me ask you something. I told you I had 3 days between finding out about the pregnancy and the fire. I told you I spent those days moving carefully, transferring documents, making calls, securing things that needed securing. What I did not tell you is what else I did in those 3 days. I pushed them, not clumsily, not obviously, like a woman who understood exactly how much pressure a person needed before they stopped calculating consequences and started acting from fear. I made Vladimir believe, through carefully placed words, through implications rather than statements, through the art of making a person arrive at a conclusion you have built for them without showing them the architecture, that I was going to expose everything, that I had evidence, that I was going to take the company, take the pack, take Dorian, and leave them with nothing and nowhere. I made him afraid enough to act. I made them both afraid enough to act. What I had not fully accounted for, the one variable in an otherwise calculation, was Dorian. I had believed they would not touch him. I had believed that even in their fear, even in the worst version of what they were capable of, there was a line. There wasn't. And that, the moment I stood at that window with my son in my arms and looked down at the ground below and made the calculation that saved his life, that was the only moment in this entire story where something happened that I had not planned. Everything else I built. Dorian is alive. He has been alive since the night of the fire. He is with people I trust, in a place I will not name, growing and breathing and entirely unaware of the machinery his mother has been operating since the night she carried him out of a burning window and made a decision about how to use what came next. I know what you are feeling right now. I know because I built that feeling. Carefully, deliberately, from the first sentence of this story. The image of a mother and her child asleep while the fire came. The grief I performed for you across every chapter. The way I said his name, Dorian, with just enough weight, just enough pause, that you filled the silence with your own heartbreak. You grieved a child who was never dead. You pitied a mother who was never a victim. How did I do it? I told you the truth. I simply arranged it. I left out the parts that would have made you put me down before you finished the first chapter. I gave you the grief before the guilt. I gave you the villain, Vladimir, Miriam, the fire, before I gave you the context that would have complicated your sympathy. I gave you a story, and you believed it, because you wanted to believe it, because it was satisfying, because betrayal and survival and revenge are the oldest story there is, and something in the human heart reaches for it before the mind can ask questions. You never asked questions. You were too busy being on my side. And Zale, you want to know about Zale. He knew. Not everything. Not from the beginning. But Zale Morrow did not build an empire by being deceived by the people in front of him. He saw through my performance faster than anyone ever has. He saw the edges of it. The places where the grief was slightly too controlled, the places where the story had been slightly too arranged, and he made a decision. He stayed anyway. Not because he was fooled. Because he was curious. Because I was the first person he had ever encountered who operated the way he operated, who understood the world as a series of arrangements and executed within it with genuine intelligence. And that curiosity became something neither of us planned for and both of us felt. What exists between us now is not a transaction. I am not entirely sure what it is. I am not entirely sure I am capable of what it might need to become. But I find, and this is the closest thing to surprise I have felt in a very long time, that I would like to find out. That is perhaps the only unplanned thing in this entire story. Him. My mother was right about one thing. I am exactly her. Everything she taught me, every skill, every instinct, every methodology, I absorbed and I refined and I turned, eventually, on her. She made me into the most effective version of what she was, and then was shocked when that version outgrew her. You cannot build a weapon and then be surprised when it turns in your direction. She of all people should have known that. So, here we are. You came into the story with Vladimir as the villain, and Miriam as his accomplice, and me as the woman who rose from the ash and took back everything they stole. And that story is true. Every word of it. It is also not the whole story. The whole story is this. There are no clean victims. There are no uncomplicated villains. There are only people making choices in the service of their own survival and their own hunger and the version of the world that lives inside their head and feels, to them, completely real and completely justified. Vladimir destroyed me. I destroyed Vladimir. Miriam made me. I unmade Miriam. The cycle does not have a hero. It has participants, and the most dangerous participant, the one you should always be most careful of, is the one telling you the story. Because the one telling the story decides what you know, and what you know decides what you feel, and what you feel decides whose side you are on. You were on my side the entire time. I gave you one side of a coin and you held it in your hand and you were certain, completely, righteously certain, that you understood its full weight. You didn't even know there was another side. This is why you do not judge from one side of the coin. Anyone can make themselves the victim. The real victims are the ones who never get to tell their story. Think about that. Think about every story you have ever been told. Think about who was telling it, and think about what they chose to leave out. End.